Welcome to the Get Real Podcast, your high-octane boost of in the trenches, tell it like it is reality therapy for personal, business, and real estate investing success. With your hosts, powerpreneurs, Angela Thomas and Ron Phillips. It's time to get real.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Get Real Podcast. I'm Angela Thomas and I'm here with Ron Phillips. Hey Ron.
Here we are.
Hey.
Another awesome episode.
We were just talking about how Ron's weather's awesome. You know, here we are in January. We have Chad on with us today, Chad Gallagher, right? And we were just joking about, you know, Ron's nice weather as usual. So real quick,
yeah,
Chad
thanks a lot for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being on. Chad owns Slate Property Management Group. They manage 4,000 units. They own 200 properties. They manage rentals in 4 states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, and Virginia. And he also has a podcast called the Real Estate Hackers Podcast, which I think is really cool because it's mixed with, it makes me think of funnel hackers. Is that where you guys got it from?
It's actually not. We got it from the cross-section of people who actually live in a house and rent out the other. It's now called real estate hacking. And I love the term hack in general as it relates to tech. And so
yeah, me too.
That's kind of where we came about it. Well,
cool. Well, thanks for joining us today. Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Excited to join the podcast.
Chad, this is going to rock because, you know, we have a bunch of people and we get tons of questions on property management because we sell thousands of houses and, you know, small multifamily. And it seems like consistently from the people who are just getting started in this to the people who have been doing this for, 10 years, there's always something about property management that needs to be learned. And like you said, with technology nowadays, everything in the real estate world is changing so rapidly anyway that, the property management world and real estate world just naturally change. And so if you're not keeping up, then you've got stuff to learn anyway, right? And so I'm super excited to have you on to help everybody understand a little bit more about this crazy thing of property management.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, which is, if you think about how we run our business today, I mean, if I look at all the different things we do, honestly, 10 years ago, most of that doesn't exist. And so, I mean, I wasn't managing properties 10 years ago. We started about 7 years ago, but honestly, the evolution of change has accelerated dramatically, and it is changing all the time. And if you're managing things the same way you managed them 10 years ago, it just wouldn't make any sense anymore. So I think and by the way, this is a huge win for investors. I actually think tech and property management, as it continues to evolve, it's going to lead to better returns for investors, which we can talk to why I believe that. But actually, this is like a really, really good thing for investors. If you don't want to manage your own properties, I think all the technology change on the property management front is going to be a huge win for investors.
Interesting.
Yeah, I 100% agree. In addition to the fact that it's really good for property management companies, because I think something that most people don't understand, at least over the last 7 years, and since 7 years ago, things looked remarkably different than they do today, Chad. I think what people don't realize is that the margins are so slim in property management, but yet people think that the 8 to 10% or whatever it is percent that they're paying is so much money. They think it is so much money, right? That you guys are just getting, rich off of their tiny little 100, 150 or whatever the fee is.
Yeah.
And I think what they don't realize is everything that you guys do and the amount of what used to be, human capital that went into that, and now is still a lot of that, but now along with tech, it can make. I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think it can make property management more profitable, which is ultimately good for the client, because if you guys are really profitable, then you can provide better service.
Well, I'll tell you, it's actually less about profit. It's more about scalability. Sure. So if you think about here's like some of the things I think about is that in a world where you don't have a lot of tech, what you have is a lot of humans doing things, right?
Yep.
And so as the number of humans you have doing things scale, the complexity scales. And it's really hard to run a scaled company with, tens of thousands of people paying bills and checking up after things and all the kind of just manual tasks, handling ledgers that go into property management. And so the beauty of tech is that tech scales infinitely. That's why tech companies are worth so much more. And so because of that, tech doesn't make the same mistakes that humans do. I mean, obviously tech could make a mistake, and so what you're going to see is you're going to see property management companies are going to become basically a combination of tech and people, and the amount of people per unit is actually going to decline. The amount of tech is going to increase. And so I actually think the profit of property management is actually, it's not the profit per unit is actually going to stay the same. It's just that a company, so we manage 4,000 units. I mean, even 10 years ago, that would have pretty well been impossible. I mean, companies weren't out there managing 4,000, plus units. We've only been around 6 years. That company didn't exist 10 years ago because it was too hard to scale. But now that scaling with tech has become easier, for us to keep growing with tech is much easier. And then from an investor perspective, that means a couple things. I actually think property management fees are going to come down a little bit. So you mentioned 8 to 10%. So we charge 7%. And I don't see that will never increase. If anything, that may go down over time. So that's a huge win for investors. But the third thing is, as property management companies scale, you may not need to have 20 different property management companies in all these different towns. I think you'll see some consolidation among property management companies.
I think we're already seeing consolidation.
Yeah, we are.
There you go.
It's happening on a global scale right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is predictable returns. So in a world with tech is just much more predictable. And so that means that you can predict an eviction being filed properly every time. And you can predict that the tenant's going to, if they don't pay rent, they'll be out in 2 months. As opposed to a manual process where if it's done well, it's done in 2 months. If it's not done well, it could be 6 months. Right? And so take that into all the different things you think about in terms of property management, things that could go wrong. As things become more predictable, returns become more predictable. And frankly, you actually probably sell more houses because investors invest more in real estate because it looks more like investing into the stock market with much more predictable returns over time.
Interesting. Do you mind giving us a little more detail, like, specifically what you're doing differently than other companies we may be working with, or?
Yeah. I would say, so high arching, the number one thing is just we want to lean into tech whenever possible. So every time we face a problem in our company, my first response is there should be a technology solution here. And if there isn't, our next idea is, could we build something? And then if that doesn't work, then we move to, okay, let's have a person do this. But the person's actually always the third option. And that sounds so cool, but I'll give you some examples of where that's like paid off. So we had a problem where some of our owners would say, I email a property manager and I don't always get a timely response to my email.
Yeah.
And you'd say, like, so why is that, right? So why does that happen? Like, what would be the reason for that, right? And so it's all sorts of reasons. It could be an irresponsible person who's not super organized. It could be somebody who's on vacation for a week, right? It could be someone all of a sudden got really busy and maybe didn't alert anyone to that. So it turns out, like, email is actually not a great way to communicate for that reason, right? There's all sorts of kind of ways that go wrong. So instead, we actually encourage our owners to submit a ticket, like a support ticket. And that ticket, what's cool about that is it's still the property manager who responds to that ticket. But if the property manager doesn't respond in a couple of days, a red alert goes off to their manager that says, hey, something's awry here. We haven't closed this ticket out. We haven't got an answer. And then someone else can jump in from our company and respond to that ticket and close out the ticket. We can hold people accountable much better. If someone goes on vacation, or, like, let's say worst case scenario, they get really sick, or all of a sudden they move, all these like really weird things that actually happen in real life, right? People just, they want to leave the company for some reason. Now someone can come in and actually handle their workload without having to like somehow get into
call a million people and try to figure out what the hell's going on.
Right. So it's such a simple little thing like that. And by the way, a ticketing system, we didn't invent it. So we leverage a piece of technology called Freshdesk. We sure didn't build the technology, and we sure aren't the first company to do it. When you call a lot of tech-forward companies, your thing gets turned into a support ticket, which just ensures that it gets resolved in a timely manner. So
cool.
That's one that actually doesn't even have anything to do with real estate. It's really all about just an owner getting the satisfaction of getting an answer. But where that plays into returns for an owner is sometimes those things the owner's asking for are really, really important. Hey, can you make sure that you submit my registration to the city? Super small task, right?
Yeah. Or I changed my bank account. Make sure you update it before you before you send my payment next month.
That's right. Anything about property management, that's a lot of what this is. It's actually not rocket science. Anybody could call up a city and get it registered. Anybody could change the bank account info. Where things run awry is when you rely on someone to remember to do that. If you don't have a ticket open and that gets forgotten, owner assume it's done. And let's just take both those examples. Let's say that the property's not properly registered. And let's just say, 9 months down the road, either you get a fine from the city, expensive, or worst case scenario, you're working through like an eviction or something like that, and you get halted because the city says, you can't move forward, you're not registered. And all that traces back to somebody just opening an email and forgetting to complete a task, right?
Yeah.
So,
I think the majority of the discontent when it comes to property management companies is what you were talking about.
It is.
It stems from one of two things. And Angela, we get this all the time, right? It's all about communication.
Yeah.
Or no, that's not really what it's about. It's about lack of communication.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like, when I first started this company, I had a totally different opinion. But when I first started, I thought, we just need all great property managers. Right? And so when I would have an owner complaining that like, communication's not good here, our initial response was fire property manager. And the problem with that approach is it doesn't scale because you can do your darndest to hire good property managers, but it's like right now in our company, we have 40 property managers, right, on the team. Well, look, I think we've got a great team, and I think 36 of the 40 are great property managers, but
who are the other? Are you dropping names right now?
No.
They're new. They're new. We'll just say that they're new.
Like, let's say they're new, or maybe they're going through a life. They just had a baby, right? So maybe they're, a property manager whose wife just had a baby, and maybe the baby's sick. These things happen, right? It's not just like bad people who are irresponsible. There's life things that come up. But in those 2 months when somebody has a baby, but they're still working, and they're dealing with a sick child, that property manager might not be working at optimal capacity. And so what we used to say was like, it's an irresponsible property manager. Now we say, no, there has to be the checks and balances in place that alert the company something's not right here. Somebody else can jump in. And then long term, we'll figure out what is going on there, but not lead to this like death cycle of, because I'll tell you what used to happen was the only way I would find out would be I would start getting phone calls saying, hey, haven't heard from Jimmy in a while, and then get another phone call, haven't heard from Jimmy in a while. And the problem with that is by the time an ownership team gets those calls, it's kind of too late. You've already had a lot of problems that have built up, and you won't even see those problems because all the mistakes that were made, you won't catch them, 3-6 months down the line.
Yeah, we've actually experienced property management companies that were amazing fall apart when some big event in their life happened, like a marriage or a baby, and so we've seen that
100%.
firsthand happen.
And we've experienced them due to scaling the wrong way.
Yeah.
To your point, Chad, like we've had property management companies that were managing, several hundred properties, and they were fantastic. They were so good. And then within 6 months, because they got this new account that had hundreds of houses in it, and it completely nuked their systems internally, and all of a sudden, I mean, they suck worse than anybody we've ever experienced in our lives. So how you go from in 6 months from being the best property management company to the worst property management company is that you outgrew your systems, and you didn't have the ability to put new systems in place. And
it's going to sound crazy, and some people may flinch at this, but honestly, what it means is you were probably too reliant on people.
Yeah,
100%.
A couple really good people.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah. So, like, one thing I've seen, and this is good advice for anyone listening. Something I suggest not doing. Actually, a lot of our owners will say when they're interviewing a property management company, what they want to do is they want to interview the property manager who will be working their property, and that is, in today's day and age, that actually makes no sense for a whole bunch of reasons. First of which is people just naturally move, they change jobs, they change professions, portfolios expand. So that person you're interviewing, it's highly likely that in 2 years, they're not going to be the property manager on the property anyway, right? And so what you really should be doing is you're interviewing the property management company, and with that, it's way more about process and systems and technology that is not reliant on Cindy or Jimmy to do a great job, but is instead a plug and play. And you want the best people possible, but you're not reliant on individual people.
Yep.
That makes so much sense.
It does.
So let's regress just a little bit, because we've been talking about some pretty high level stuff. But there may be some people on here who are going, okay, well, I'm under contract on my first property, or I've got one property or two properties, and I've been managing myself. I want to move into property management. Like, just encompass really quickly, what does a property management company do? Ron buys a property today, and I call up Chad's company and I say, hey, Slade House, like I need a property management company. What are you going to do for me?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, at its super high level, and then we'll get into the tactical, at a super high level, the property management company is your day-to-day resource to take care of your asset and make sure that you're getting the returns you're looking for. So what does that actually mean? And I'm actually going to also talk about what that doesn't mean, because that's just as important and
Yes,
something
definitely.
that people don't talk about enough. But what does it mean? It means the tenant is paying rent to us, right? The property management company. So, if they have a question with how much to pay, the property management company is essentially ensuring there's an accurate ledger, which can get trickier than you'd think, of how much do they owe, how much have they paid, and then ensuring if they don't pay, we move forward in the eviction process, which, again, can be as simple as a couple filings and someone's in and out, or could drag on if not done right, or if things get more complicated with the appeal process. So all of that falls under the property management company. So you, the investor, are not ever having to go to the local magistrate court. You're not ever filing an eviction. You're not collecting rent. And frankly, you're not really ever talking to the tenant. The tenant's only talking to the property management company when they have concerns.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out that you should never talk to your tenant. That's an unpardonable sin in my book. Why in the hell even have a property management company if you're going to trade emails with your tenant?
It's a bad idea, and it's also a bad idea because not only does it make more work for you, but it creates what we call the mom versus dad scenario.
Absolutely.
Tenant goes to dad, or in this case, say owner, and say, I paid my rent on time, but they didn't collect it right, or they lost my check in the mail. And then owner gets involved when it's like the worst thing you could possibly do, right? Is like, you don't want to be the intermediary. You want to be a property management company dealing with the tenant. The tenant has one point of contact and essentially one ruling, call it body, who they can deal with.
And the other some owners, for whatever reason, they think that This is a way to keep tabs on whether or not the property management company is doing a good job. It is the dumbest thing you can possibly do. I was on a tour with a client, and they said that they give their card to every tenant. They go and they give their card to the tenant. Any problems with the property management company, you call me. And I'm thinking to myself, man, why don't you just be a landlord? Like, seriously, you have completely cut the legs out from underneath the person who you have in place to protect you from that individual, and you just gave them your card and took all the power and authority away from the property management company.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the other problem that it causes is a logistical nightmare. So one of the harder things in property management is coordinating maintenance, whether that be an emergency or a less an emergency, a slight leak on a sink or a door's not working. So when you get involved, one of the harder tasks for a property management company to do is to intake that maintenance request, run it by the owner, get it approved, and eventually get the problem resolved, usually also coordinating with the tenant to make sure we can get a maintenance tech in there. Again, it sounds easy, but especially when you get into cold weather and emergencies, it can be really tricky. When you throw an owner into that mix where the tenant's also reaching out to an owner, now you run the risk of who is resolving this problem. And that leads to two really bad scenarios. One is you both try to resolve it. So now I've got two plumbers coming out to the property. The other is nobody resolves it because everybody thinks the other person is resolving it.
Oh boy, yeah.
And by the way, all these things I've seen because we've done them over the years, right? And so the way to combat that is there's one centralized place to intake maintenance requests. We use a piece of tech called Property Meld, and that is like our air traffic control for maintenance. And if it's not in Property Meld, there's a problem. Everything goes in there, and that is how we coordinate it, no matter who's doing it, no matter what's getting done. It's one centralized source, and there's an owner for that, and that's our maintenance coordinator. And they're responsible for figuring out who is ultimately resolving this problem.
Yep. Cool.
So let's jump to the other thing too. So then this is what property management companies do. What are the responsibilities of the owner? So Angela goes out and buys a property in Virginia because it's less cold than the other places. Angela buys a place in.
Okay.
Do what?
Out of the 4 states, I had to choose. Right.
It sounds like Ron doesn't like cold.
I really dislike it pretty intensely.
I'm not feeling it either.
Yeah, so it's a little chilly here today, but the sun's out, which makes it feel not quite as bad. But
it's 27 degrees where I am.
Well, what's chilly, Ron? Like 55? Come on.
Yeah, it's low 50s right now. We'll probably be upper 50s by the end of the day. But I have to dress in long sleeves for this kind of weather. This is ridiculous. Okay, so Angela buys a property in Virginia.
Yeah.
Now we've kind of figured out what your responsibilities are, Chad, but what are legitimately the responsibilities that sometimes people think are yours but really are not and fall squarely on Angela's shoulders?
Yeah, so I call this asset management. Well, it's not I didn't make the term, but to me that every property, whether it's a single family home or a multi-unit building, is going to require some level of asset management. And what that is really is the level above the property manager. And that is the person to come in and make that strategic decision that really only the owner should be making.
So
I'll give you an example. There's a leaky roof, and we send a roofer out there, and he says you have two options. You could patch it for $400, or I can put a new roof on there. New roof, let's say the new roof's going to cost $4,000, right? Now, that decision is not just math-based, and there's not even always a right answer. A lot of it's going to come into your own finances. What are you looking to do? Or, are you looking to just squeak out every last dollar over the next year or two and then sell the property? Well, if so, then probably a roof patch for $400 makes more sense. Are you planning on owning this for the next 20 years? Well, and by the way, maybe the roof is 15 years old. Yeah, look, you're going to need a new roof in the next 3 years. You should probably put a new roof on. But that's not really the role of the property management company. The role of the property management company is to give you access to all that information, but ultimately it's up to the owner to kind of make a call there. So that would be one example. I think there's a decent amount of that. It basically setting the strategic mission for the property. Here's what we're trying to do. I'll give you another example. So one thing we didn't talk about yet is finding tenants. That's part of something a property management company does, is find tenants for you. Well, sometimes there's owners who will say, this is a rough area. I just want a tenant in there to start paying rent. You can lower your standards a little bit, but I realize that also is going to increase the risk of this tenant not paying rent. We have other owners who will say, I'm not lowering my standards at all. My standard is a 650 credit score, and whether it's a C-class property or not, I require 650. Now, the win there is that tenant's going to stay there for a while and they're going to pay their rent. Downside is that unit may stay empty longer. I think ultimately those are decisions that an owner should be making. When I say decisions, it's really it's setting the strategic principles for how you want this property managed, and ultimately what are you trying to get out of it over the next 1, 2, 10, 20 years. And so sometimes I see that owners think that because a property management company is involved, they don't have to do anything. And unfortunately, that's not quite true, right? There is still that asset management role that plays in. And we're not talking about hundreds of hours. This isn't something you should be scared of, but it is something that should be identified. And if you, the owner, are too busy to respond to those kinds of questions once every 2 weeks, once a month, once every 2 months, then I would say you should assign somebody, either a personal assistant or an asset manager, to take on that role.
That almost sounds like a broken record of me. I seriously can't stand this. We have had clients in the past who couldn't bother themselves to check their account and make sure the money arrived. And I'm thinking to myself, seriously? I mean, if you can't, and you're that busy because your business is so all encompassing, you should be able to afford a freaking bookkeeper, right, or an asset manager, or somebody like your assistant to open up your bank account and go, check mark, yep, money hit. And then if it didn't hit, to go, I wonder if I should maybe reach out to the management company. Oh, look, there's 8 emails from the management company and 100 missed calls, and they've been trying to get a hold of me because my tenant skipped town, and they want to know if they have permission to make the place ready. And that's the other thing that drives me absolutely up the wall, is that sometimes owners just won't communicate, and you as the property manager, you have no authority to go drop $3,000 on a make ready without the owner saying you're okay to do that, right? Right.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, like I said before, I think it's totally reasonable for the owner. Let's say you're, let's just say you're running a business, a very, very hectic business as an owner, and you want to invest in real estate on the side. I don't think you necessarily have to be that point of contact. I think it's totally reasonable for you to say, I'm going to have someone else in my life, my significant other, my child, my mother. I mean, all of these are actually reasonable and things that we actually see happen sometimes in the business, and I don't have a problem with that. We just want to know who's our point of contact, and it's got to be somebody who can get back to us in a day or two when we have a question. Because strange things come up. I mean, even a weird thing like evictions, some municipalities will require a current dated authorization form against that specific tenant in order to move forward with an eviction. That seems kind of silly to me, but they require it. And look, nothing's more frustrating to our team than to not be able to do our job because we're not getting that back and forth with the owner. And then ultimately, because ultimately the prime management company is ultimately responsible for generating returns, right? And so I get really frustrated when sometimes we'll see things not going the right direction, and someone will say like, real estate's not for me. I hate that phrase. I think real estate's for everyone. It's just all about setting up processes and knowing. I mean, I just flat out asked the question, who is going to be the asset manager for the property? I think it's like a totally reasonable question to ask.
Yeah. Who's the communication go through?
Yeah.
There has to be communication.
Who's the point of contact?
Right.
And that point of contact could be a whole bunch of different people, but it's got to be somebody. Somebody has to be the point of contact. And then to your point, I think it's a good one. I think it's really important that an owner once a month, and it doesn't have to be 6 times a month, but at the end of the month, sometime in those first 2 to 5, 7 days of the next month, just spends, a few minutes looking at the performance of the previous month of their property.
Yep. Great advice. Yep.
Yeah, because it's they have to do this with their and most of the people that fall into this category are business owners or professionals, both of which are extremely busy, but both of which know the importance of financials, for hell's sake. It's not like they can run their company successfully without ever looking at the financials. It's remarkable to me how they can completely disconnect from their business that has financials that they look at. And they may hate it like I do. I don't like it. I mean, I don't like the meetings that I have with my bookkeeper, my CPA. I don't like them. But I have to do that piece of the business or the business doesn't run right. Yeah. And it's the same thing over here. It's no different. Right? So unless you put a CEO in charge of which would be an asset manager, in charge of your portfolio and charge them with it, then this is not a stock. You can't just buy it and forget it. It's not the way it works.
Nope. That passive income thing is relative,
Yeah, I think that's a problem. I think that people preach passive income, and there
are just a few terms, Chad, that should be eliminated. I get pissed. I hate passive income and I hate turnkey. Can we just we should nuke both of those things.
All right, Ron, I better go take those off of your website, man. I'm sorry.
I know. I hate them. The only reason they're on there is because that's the only thing people know.
For it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I hate
it. Yeah, no, it's right. It's look, if you want passive income, go put your money into a blanket S&P 500 fund, right?
Or a REIT if you want it in real estate. That's fine.
Right. That's right. Or a REIT's fine. By the way, now here's the difference, right? Those same people will say, well, no, but I don't want 4% returns. I want 9% returns. Great. I want you to get 9% returns too. But all I want you to do is spend 15 minutes the first week of the month.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
It's not a bad return on your time, really, when you think about it.
All right, guys, I think we beat that horse. If you don't mind, Chad, real quick, Ron and I have been sitting on questions that were sent.
Let's do it.
And here's why we're going to do it. There's this guy, Rick, that really loves our lightning rounds. So Rick, this is for you, buddy. We're going to do a lightning
Rick,
round.
I am pumped. Is Rick an investor or is he
because his tag is Flip with Rick. So yes.
Flip with Rick. And
I don't know what he's flipping, but I'm guessing it's real estate.
Rick, we are coming at you, buddy.
Okay, right. Chad, so these are lightning rounds, so fast answers, because we got quite a few questions to get through.
Oh, boy.
All right? No pressure.
Let's do it.
All right, we're going to take turns. So I'm first. First question is, what do I do if I don't get my money? So this guy checked his account, and there's no money.
Yeah, and you know what? This is going to sound crazy. This happens, and it's not always someone's fault. It could be as little as a typo, right? So we put your ACH info in. It could be a typo. It could be that someone gave us the wrong account. So what do? You reach out to the prime management company. If they have a ticketing system, you put in a ticket. If they prefer email or phone call, but you just send it through and you just say very simple, hey, I was expecting money and I didn't get it. By the way, the other answer...
Without yelling.
Yeah.
Without yelling at them.
No, you don't have to freak out the first time. It's interesting. I find that a lot of times people think when they don't get their money the first time that it's like a red alert to them. They think like I'm stealing their money.
I've been scammed. That's what.
Right, I've been scammed. Exactly. And I don't know. I think just like assuming these are reasonable people. You've probably got a referral from someone. You've probably done your interview process. Another reason why you may not have got money, well, there's a whole bunch of reasons. Another reason.
Well, that's okay. Well, let's go through one of them. So, Chad,
okay.
Now I've called you.
Yeah.
And turns out the tenant's late. What do you recommend? Tenant's late. What do I do?
Tenants late. Yeah. So that's a very real reason why you may not have gotten money. The short answer there is that we think you should be filing an eviction right around the 15th of the month is our process. People have different views on this, but even if they promise to pay. Yeah, so we're not Judge Judy here. So
yes.
I like it.
So I call it Judge Judy because I used to do this. We would bring our prime managers in and it'd be like on the 15th, and I'd feel like Judge Judy. I'd sit there and say, okay, so Jim Smith hasn't paid rent, and then our property manager, Ashley, would say, well, Jim hasn't paid because his mom broke her foot.
Oh, gosh.
And
there you go.
and I'm like, okay. And I'm like literally trying to follow the story. And I'm like, okay, she broke her foot. And then I'd like take notes and I'd be like, wait, didn't she break her foot last month? And he'd be like, nope, that was the different foot. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm having a hard time.
And this is, by the way, this is what you deal with if you give them your card, like a moron.
Yes,
Please don't ever do that.
Right. Yeah. You're going to have Jim Smith telling you about his mom's broken foot. So now we actually run it like Domino's would run a pizza chain. You order a pizza, you got to pay for the pizza. You live in the house, you got to pay for the house. And so in our world, if you haven't paid by the 15th, we're filing an eviction.
Done.
Basically, the only reason we wouldn't would be two things. If there's a habitability problem. So if there is like something that is not habitable that is an emergency and we're fixing, we're going to wait till we fix it to file. Only other reason would be if the owner literally does not allow us to file. And there's a point, and we actually wanted to not even do that, but we do still allow an owner to kind of override us. I really don't advise it. So I think just because you file does not mean you're evicting the tenant. Here's a good stat for you. We actually see 83% of tenants that we file on will pay the rent before we
They just need to know you're serious.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Angela.
Yeah. So
Next
sorry to cut you off, Chad. Next question.
It's okay. Fire round.
Tenant moved out. They left a mess. What now?
Tenant moved out. They left a mess. Yeah, I mean, look. Well, first off, most tenants move out leaving a mess. So don't be surprised. Second off, yeah. So you're holding a security deposit. That's part of what the security deposit's for. Prime management company should come in within a couple of days and basically give you a rent-ready estimate, and that should be broken down. And then you rock and roll. And luckily, your security deposit will hopefully cover a lot of it, and you move forward.
Okay,
Cool.
so now everything's done, ready to go. Been on the market for whatever, 20, 30 days. Place isn't renting. What do I do now? And now I'm freaking out. So now what?
Yeah. So we actually have like 7 different checkpoints that we go through if a property's not renting. It could be a whole bunch of reasons. But the bottom line is you as the owner should be kind of having a communication with the prime manager. We encourage, it's actually 21 days is when we have our prime manager reach out to the owner and say, hey, we're having this is renting slower than we'd think. Here are some things that could be causing it. I'll give you a couple quick ones. Price could be too high. So we may need to lower the price. There might need to be some additional maintenance done. There's something causing it to not show as well as it could show. Seasonality is a real thing. Property management companies, honestly, here's a dirty little secret. They exaggerate seasonality as a general rule of thumb. So it turns out people are renting properties during the entire year. We just
rented a bunch last week.
Yeah. So they rent all year round. So seasonality does not mean that in the winter nobody rents, but it does mean that like if a property went on market December 20th and we're now sitting January 8th and it hasn't rented yet, well, I mean, that is literally the worst time in the entire calendar year to try to rent a property,
right.
Due to holidays and stuff. So there's some of that. There's also like, maybe there's a weird seasonality thing, like this is college housing and, So those are the things, but the bottom line is talk to your prime manager and just have that dialogue back and forth of what's going on.
That's great advice. Perfect. Okay, next one. Should I have my property management do regular inspections?
So I think so. I think once a year is the right timing for that. Some owners, I mean, I've had people be like once a quarter, we want to see an inspection. I mean, that's a lot. That's just it just don't make a lot
I'll say it. That's insane.
Okay.
I'm sorry if she's listening, but that sounds like it was my mom, Susan.
That's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
So
Okay, I agree.
really
Once a year, I think that's fantastic. Then you know if the people should be there or not be there, and
Yeah. And by the way, there's an interesting point here, which is a lot of cities actually require an inspection. Usually not once a year, but usually once every 2 to 4 years. So that counts. Right? So there's a good chance they're already in there that year. Also, if it's a Section 8 tenant, you're going to have a Section 8 inspection already once a year either way. So what we say is if we're already in there for an inspection, the property manager is going to join that inspection and kind of write up their own notes. And if not, the property manager is getting in there once a year.
Gotcha.
Okay. Should I raise rents every year?
So this is a good one. We started out saying no, but I now feel very strongly that you should raise rents every year, 2 to 4%. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I know it's a fire round, but here's why. So I had a tenant, first ever house I bought. He lived there for 5 years. We didn't raise rents. He's now $250 under rent. I call him up and I say, Frank. And he says, yo, Chad, how you doing, man? And, this is a guy I've known, our first ever tenant we placed. I say, hey, we got to raise your rent. He says, okay, how much? I said, $250. He freaks, right? And he said, Chad, like, I can't budget for a $250 increase. Why didn't you just increase my rent every year? And then I could have budgeted it in my life in a way that this would have not been a big shock. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, man, like a tenant just asked me to have raised his rent the last 4 years. So that's what it comes down to. A 2 to 4%, you're talking $25-ish, $30 raise of rent.
People say it's no big deal, right? So
that's right.
Awesome.
Yeah, they may get testy, but they're not going to move over $25.
That's right. And then honestly, they understand that's inflation. But look, I mean, and I hope this happens to everyone. I hope you have a tenant that stays 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. If you don't do this, if you don't increase their rent over that period of time, to be honest, by year 6, 7, 8, that's no longer a good tenant because they're just too far under market rent. And you're losing too much money.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool.
Well, listen, we need to wrap it up, Chad. This has been awesome from the tech perspective to how to scale a management company to what to look for in a management company, what to ask, who to ask, why to ask. And then all of the great information just about personally managing a property through a property management company. I think this has been excellent for everybody listening. Awesome. I just want to put a plug out there for all of you listening that own real estate or are going to own real estate, that when you communicate with your property management companies, let's not act like our hair's on fire, and let's treat them like any other human being. They're not stealing from you. They're not treating you any worse than any other person would. Generally speaking, they're doing a really, really good job, and they're doing something that most everyone else in the country doesn't want to do. So
yeah, and I'll make one quick comment on that. Just seeing this happen in real life, because people do have emotions. If by being a jerk to your property manager, I can promise you it's not going to get you better results long term. Our best clients, I actually call partners. I call them friends. We hang out, and that level of trust and loyalty means our company would do anything. Yeah, for our clients, anything. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's not even their investment property. If they're having a personal problem, if I would do anything for these people, the person who calls up and is just screaming and swearing, and that does not lead to a good long-term partnership. And so,
even if you live in Jersey, you don't do that, right? I mean, even if you live in Jersey.
I'm going to take the fifth on that.
All right. Chad, thank you so much, man. We really, really appreciate you coming on and
awesome,
and dumping a whole bunch of knowledge on everybody on our podcast.
Yeah, and I'll give people my email address. My email is chad@slatehousegroup.com.
And then one more time on your podcast.
Yeah, the podcast is called Real Estate Hackers. So this is like nerd only podcast basically. So if you're a nerd, you like real estate, you like tech,
or if you don't know yet, I mean, give it a try. Maybe you are a closet nerd. You didn't even know you were in the closet.
It does take a while to realize you're a nerd, right?
Yeah. And when I say nerd, we're not talking like code and that kind of stuff, but it is, it's for people who are interested in like, where's the world of real estate going over the next 5 years.
It's an interesting podcast. I've listened to it. It's really well done. In addition to that, it gives you a unique perspective on the real estate market because of the tech angle that comes from it. So
yeah, I think
Chad,
the world's going.
So much. So. Listen, everybody, like the episode. If you don't like it anyway, because it's rude to dislike it. And then share it with all of your friends. You can find us on getrealestatesuccess.com. Send everybody there. And
awesome, man. Hey, this is fun.
Till next time. Thanks, Chad.
Thanks for listening. Thanks, Chad.
This has been the Get Real Podcast. To subscribe and for more information, including a list of all episodes, go to getrealestatesuccess.com.